A landlord stands in his kitchen at dawn, papers scattered across the counter, the silence broken only by the hum of a fridge and the weight of a tenant who hasn't paid in months. Across Canada, stories like his are multiplying. Promises made, contracts misunderstood, systems backed up, and rent arrears stacking like a slow-moving avalanche. You feel it in every delayed hearing, every unanswered call, every month that ends deeper in the red. This isn't a minor dispute, it's a warning of what 2026 is turning into. Before we go further, like, share, and subscribe. The morning light doesn't feel warm anymore. It stretches thin across a kitchen counter where unopened envelopes sit like silent accusations. A landlord, just one of thousands, stares at the numbers again, as if they might change if he blinks hard enough. They don't. They never do. Another month of unpaid rent, another promise broken, another hearing delayed. This is how the crisis begins, not with breaking news or loud headlines, but with quiet rooms, strained breath, and the unmistakable realization that something in Canada's rental market has snapped. You feel it even if you're not ready to admit it. You feel it every time a tenant says they'll pay next week, every time a landlord refreshes their banking app, every time someone checks the mailbox with a sinking stomach. Because across the country, from Whitby to Brampton to Vancouver, a new kind of fear is spreading. Not the fear of rising rents. Canada already lived through that. Not the fear of high interest rates. Those wounds are still open. This is something deeper, something more personal. A fear born from the collapse of trust itself. Landlords trusted the system. They trusted agents who promised strong vetting. They trusted paperwork that looked legitimate. They trusted references, IDs, pay stubs, application folders neatly stapled together. And then, one day, the rent stopped coming. Not delayed, not partial, just gone. At first, there's confusion. Maybe a banking error, maybe an emergency, maybe bad timing. But when silence becomes the only answer, a darker truth starts to reveal itself. Calls to references go nowhere. Employers don't exist. The second applicant contributing to rent was never real. The paperwork, so convincing at first glance, folds apart like thin cardboard, and by then, it's too late. The tenant is inside. The law says they stay until a decision is made, and the decision could be months away. In living rooms across Canada, small landlords, ordinary families, couples, newcomers, retirees sit at their tables with calculators that can't soften the blow. Mortgage payments don't wait. Utilities don't pause. Property taxes don't care. A single non-paying tenant can push a family to the brink, and in 2026, more are reaching that brink than ever before. Because this isn't just a rental crisis. It's a chain reaction of failures. A promise from an agent that wasn't in the contract. A system meant to protect both sides, now overwhelmed beyond capacity. A spike in fraudulent applications that slipped through cracks no one noticed until everything unraveled.
And behind every statistic is someone like
a property owner in Toronto
who believed hiring an agent would shield him from this exact nightmare, who believed that good tenant meant safe investment, who believed that verification was automatic, routine, guaranteed. Instead, he's left with arrears stacking into the tens of thousands and a tenant who won't leave. Left facing hearings spaced months apart, stories like his were once rare. Now, they're multiplying. Because when rents soared, desperation followed. When scrutiny thinned, fraud grew. And when the entire system became clogged, tenants who never intended to pay found opportunities. This is the hidden crisis no one wanted to talk about. The quiet collapse behind Canada's rental market. Families who once counted on their rental income to cover a mortgage now whisper in their homes about selling, refinancing, or giving up altogether. Their investment, the one thing they believed would secure their future, is turning into a threat they can't control. And Canada's rental machinery, the system that was supposed to mediate, protect, and resolve, is choking on its own backlog. Hearings postponed, cases delayed, decisions months away, people trapped in financial limbo. Small landlords, the ones with a single property, often sharing it with extended family, are discovering just how fragile their position really is. Many believe that hiring a real estate agent was like buying insurance, a safeguard, a layer of professional protection. After all, if you pay someone thousands of dollars to find the right tenant, shouldn't they check everything? Shouldn't they verify employment, call references, confirm documents, make sure everything is real? But the reality crashes down hard. If it's not in the contract, it isn't guaranteed. Verbal promises fade the moment a tenant moves in. And the paperwork, those neat organized forms, can hide everything from fabricated pay stubs to entirely fictional employers. Fraud is rising faster than awareness. Risk is rising faster than protection. Loss is rising faster than enforcement. Across Ontario and other provinces, professional property managers warn that rental fraud has climbed at a pace no one expected. What used to be one suspicious file in 100 has become clusters of them in a single week. Fake IDs polished enough to fool anyone. Employment letters formatted perfectly but tied to companies that vanish when the landlord calls. References that sound convincing until repeated attempts end in silence. Some landlords drain their savings. Some borrow from relatives. Some mortgage their own homes for the second time. Some wait for hearings that seem endlessly postponed. But this isn't only about money. It's about erosion. Erosion of trust. Erosion of safety. Erosion of the belief that Canada's rental housing structure can still function under pressure. Canada is drifting into a rental crisis defined not by headlines, but by human stories. A haunting course of fear and financial collapse. A landlord in Alberta who rented to a young couple with glowing letters of recommendation, only to discover later that the employer didn't exist. A couple in Nova Scotia who trusted a tenant who claimed to be a nurse, only to find out she had used a stolen identity.
You can't call it a safety net when it collapses on its own weight. You can't call it justice when the wait time outlives the rental agreement itself. This isn't just bureaucracy. It's paralysis. And paralysis is a vacuum, one that the wrong people step into with ease. Because the truth is simple. When a system becomes predictable, it becomes exploitable. More and more landlords are discovering the same pattern. The tenant pays the first month, maybe the second, just enough to settle in, to feel anchored, to look legitimate. Then the excuses come. A paycheck delayed, a family emergency, a banking issue. Officials insist that the majority of tenants are good, honest, hardworking people, and that part is true. But that truth becomes harder to feel when you're watching your savings evaporate into unpaid months, when you're forced to choose between taking a tenant or losing your property, when desperation meets hesitation, and hesitation costs money you don't have. And beneath it all, the weight of something larger begins to form. A sense that the country is drifting into a phase where trust itself is becoming a luxury people can no longer afford. But the landlords falling through the cracks right now aren't giant corporations. They're families, couples, retirees, immigrants who saved for a decade to buy their first rental property. People who believed that being a landlord meant stability, not survival. And as 2026 pushes deeper into uncertainty, one question rises louder than the rest. How long can an entire system function when the very foundation, trust, is quietly collapsing?
You can hear it in the way they tell their stories online, hoping someone will understand, hoping someone will believe them, hoping someone will acknowledge that this crisis is not a single-issue problem, but a knot of economic forces tightening all at once. And for landlords, the pressure isn't abstract. Rising interest rates hit them with the force of a blunt instrument. Fixed terms renew at higher costs. Variable mortgages spike with little warning. Property taxes climb. Insurance premiums swell. Every step of ownership becomes a little heavier, a little riskier, a little more unforgiving. So when rent stops coming in, the financial damage cuts fast and deep. Some try to negotiate, some try to wait it out, some consider selling. But selling isn't freedom. Not when prices are softening, buyers are cautious. The stories are everywhere. In Ontario, landlords report losing tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid rent. One man watched helplessly as his investment, meant to secure a stable future for his family, turned into a nightmare. The tenant had vanished behind false documents, false employers, false promises. Contracts, written in precise, cold legal language, offered no protection against human deceit. The real estate agent who had promised safety, oversight, verification, turned out to be a promise with no teeth. So many others learned too late that hope alone cannot safeguard an investment. The financial data paints an equally stark picture. Official reports indicate that delinquency in rental payments has climbed steadily over the past 2 years. Analysts estimate that the average landlord dealing with non-paying tenants now loses more than $20,000 annually, a figure that can obliterate small profits and even personal savings. Landlords who once treated their properties as side investments now live in a constant state of anxiety.
This crisis is not the result of a single failure, but a cascade of systemic pressures. Interest rates, hiked repeatedly over the past years, make borrowing for landlords expensive and mortgage payments heavier than ever. Inflation inflates not just prices, but anxiety, eroding household budgets. Construction shortages mean supply cannot keep up with demand. Each factor feeds the other, creating a chain reaction where affordability becomes a distant memory and financial survival a daily battle. Even in areas where rental markets were once considered stable, the quiet collapse is now unmistakable. Foreclosure notices are becoming more common. Properties remain vacant longer, and landlords take extraordinary precautions, installing security cameras, hiring property managers, spending additional money on legal protection. Yet even these measures offer only partial relief. One misstep, one fraudulent application, 1 month of missed rent, and the carefully balanced system tilts toward disaster. Inflation, relentless and unforgiving, gnaws at every corner of daily life. Prices for food, utilities, and transportation climb steadily, while wages struggle to keep pace. Rent, already consuming a growing slice of household budgets, becomes a suffocating burden. Official data shows that in multiple urban centers, over 40% of income is now spent on rent alone, a figure that once might have been considered extreme, now normalized. Analysts estimate that even modest missed payments can cascade into eviction proceedings, legal fees, and mounting debt.
Fraudulent applications, once a rarity, are now an increasingly visible symptom. Reports indicate that nearly 1 in 10 rental applications contains falsified information, fake pay stubs, phantom references, invented cosigners. These are not anomalies. They are part of a growing trend. Landlords hire agents trusting their expertise, but contracts often leave verification optional. When verbal assurances fail, the consequences are devastating. Tens of thousands in lost income, property damage, legal battles stretching months or even years. Mortgage pressures have become unbearable for many. Official data shows that average mortgage payments now consume an unprecedented portion of landlords' incomes, leaving little room for error. A single missed rent check can throw the entire balance into chaos. Analysts estimate that small landlords who once relied on rental income to cover their own living expenses are now at risk of personal bankruptcy after just a few months of arrears. The stakes have never been higher, and the safety nets thinner than ever.
Landlords are preparing for worst-case scenarios. Some are tightening rental qualifications, demanding larger deposits, hiring property managers for every oversight. Others are exiting the market entirely, selling properties at reduced prices, retreating to safer investments. Small landlords, who once formed the backbone of rental supply, now feel vulnerable, exposed to forces beyond their control. The human cost of these exits is profound. Reduced housing availability, increased rents, and communities destabilized. The quiet collapse gathers momentum, like a glacier inching forward, unstoppable and inevitable. What happens if this continues? Analysts warn that without bold, systemic intervention, the strain will deepen, financial instability may spread, social unrest could rise, and communities may feel the erosion of trust, neighbor to neighbor.
The narrative unfolding today, arrears, evictions, lost investments, could be the opening chapter in a much larger story. A story that will affect every aspect of Canadian life, economic, social, and personal. This isn't just a housing problem, it is a mirror reflecting deeper truths. The fragility of financial security, the tension between hope and reality, the thin line between stability and collapse. Neighborhoods that once thrived now face uncertainty. Landlords, small and large, watch helplessly as investments crumble. History offers echoes. Cities that experienced housing crashes, economic collapses, or financial panics decades ago knew similar patterns. Slow building pressure, quiet desperation, and eventual upheaval. Today the signs are here again. Rising debts, unpaid rent, and soaring costs, all converging into a storm that threatens to reshape life across Canada. The difference now is immediacy. The consequences are personal, intimate, unavoidable. Yet amid this tension, awareness is the first line of defense. Landlords tighten contracts. Communities hold fragile hope that lessons learned now can prevent deeper collapse tomorrow. The human spirit persists, but the economic storm does not relent. It presses forward, relentless, patient, indifferent. What happens next? Will the rental market stabilize, or will the cascade continue? Toppling families, investments, and communities alike, the answers are unknown, but the stakes could not be higher. The crisis is not a distant story. It is happening now, in homes across the nation, in wallets, in futures.